think of large, ancient, man-made structures, we can't help but consider the pyramids in Egypt. Aligned to true north in celestial bodies, the near perfection of their construction is mind-boggling. Thousands of years after they were built, scientists are still trying to uncover the mysteries of how and why they were built. But what if I told you that an unknown people possessing this same advanced knowledge of the stars lived in North America, that they built their own version of pyramids, unusual structures, and large cities with walls up to 25 feet tall? And this was all thousands of years before the Egyptians built a single pyramid. This is the story of Indiana's mysterious mounds and the people that built them. When European conquistadors first arrived in North America in the late 1400s, they found a curious people living among strange earthworks of different types. Some mounds were simply platforms, high places where the elders, chieftains, and religious leaders lived, such as here at Ocmulgee National Monument in Georgia. They were high above their subjects' heads and closer to the heavens. Some of these mounds were built for religious astronomical purposes, such as the Serpent Mound in Ohio. These type mounds accurately predicted summer and winter solstices. That way, they knew when to plant and harvest crops. The Serpent Mound was ingeniously constructed so that during sunset on summer solstice, it looks like the mouth is swallowing the sun. The earthwork is so big that you can only see the entire thing from an aircraft, drone, or satellite high above the earth. This has long led to rumors that the mound builders were either aliens or influenced by them. Strangely, it was built on top of where a large meteorite once impacted the earth. Fort Ancient at Lebanon, Ohio, is an ancient earthwork wall 3.5 miles long and surrounds a large hilltop. The wall ranges from 5 feet up to 25 feet tall. Fort Ancient is the largest prehistoric hilltop enclosure in North America. It's 270 feet above the Little Miami River. Not only did that allow for easy transportation and trade with places far away, it also provided a clear view of anyone coming or going on the river. Other mounds were made for burials, such as this one at Miamisburg, Ohio. The largest known mound in Ohio, it stands 65 feet tall. Sometimes, many people were buried beneath a mound, and other times, only a few, as if to signify how important the dead were. It has a commanding view of the area and was positioned high above the Great Miami River. In fact, all the large ancient mounds were positioned near major waterways, but this is certainly not the largest mound in North America. At Collinsville, the Monk's Mound of Cahokia stands at a staggering 100 feet tall, or 10 stories. At 951 feet long and 836 feet wide, it is absolutely massive and the biggest known man-made mound north of Mexico. In its time, there were 80 mounds in a thriving city that took up 3.5 square miles. This was bigger than London, England. It was near a major waterway, the Mississippi River, and this allowed travel and commerce all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. But by the time the conquistadors arrived in North America, the most common mounds being made were not huge like these at all. Instead, they were small burials for individuals, and not the huge ones that dotted the landscape like high-rise buildings. These were not the same people that had built the huge original mounds. They had simply occupied the abandoned cities. In the late 1700s, Indians told Daniel Boone, "Our people did not build them. They belong to a people whom our forefathers fought and drove from this territory. But whence these people came and whither they have gone, we do not know." In fact, the large mounds have a much more ancient origin. Archaeologists had long suspected that North American mounds were very old, possibly thousands of years old. But after a 2022 study of mounds on the campus of Louisiana State University, that estimate was blown off the charts. Radiocarbon dating determined that Mound B was built at least 11,000 years ago. To put this in perspective, this was built 6,500 years before the first Egyptian pyramid. It's older than Stonehenge in England, whose builders also had an advanced knowledge of astronomy and an equally mysterious past. Over time, findings from both educated research and outright vandalism suggested that these civilizations were also much more advanced than earlier thought. In present-day St. Louis, Missouri, just across the Mississippi River from the Cahokia Mounds, were 27 more mounds. The largest one, the French called La Grange de Terre, which means the earthen barn. Positioned above an impressive outcrop, it was 150 feet wide and 30 feet high. However, without thought of their historic, religious, or cultural significance, all but one of these mounds were destroyed. The Great Mound was completely gone by 1869, and only one of the 27 survived until the present day. There was no law against anyone with a shovel digging up these mounds to look for souvenirs, and that's exactly what happened. While what was done here was an offense to the dead, and certainly a loss to science, what was found here was very curious. There were items made of seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, 751 miles away, and earrings made of copper that looked like long-nosed gods. These resembled statues and art from ancient Central and South America. At other sites across America, amateur archaeologists and trained scientists found that these ancient cultures were in fact very skilled in working with copper. Much like the Mayans, Aztecs, and Inca. Many other artifacts also resemble items from those cultures. Later archaeologists classified these people by their artifacts and the type of earthworks that they made. They were known as the Archaic, Calusa, Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian cultures. But even after 100 years of modern archaeology, we know very little about these mysterious people, and that's especially true in the state of Indiana. In the late 1800s, new roads were being built throughout Indiana to promote travel and commerce. Every now and then, ancient burial and ceremonial mounds were found in front of the road being built. They were destroyed in the name of progress. Sometimes, curious artifacts, such as arrowheads, axe heads, and even jewelry, were discovered. Without any laws against it, workers simply took these items home as souvenirs, and any bones that were found were crushed and made part of the road. Workers were very indiscriminate. When a well-preserved mastodon was found in a bog, they cracked open the bones and waxed their boots with a marrow. But at some point, there was a realization that these ancient items should be investigated from a scientific and historical perspective. Indiana State geologist Edward Travers Cox, who went by E.T. Cox, was sent to these places to document and collect unusual specimens. At the time, there was no archaeology department. On many of these investigations, he brought along a worthy assistant, Professor William Borden, whom was an expert in geology, fossils, and other antiquities. Mr. Borden would later build his own museum that was revered and visited by scientists across the world. In 1878, Edward Cox was sent to study the mounds at Anderson, Indiana, now a part of Mounds State Park. He found numerous ancient, unusual earthworks. Some were small mounds of earth, while others were complex enclosures, either rectangular or circular. But the focal point was a gigantic circular enclosure, now known as the Great Mound. It's 384 feet wide, around 9 feet tall, and has an entrance about 30 feet wide. It had many secrets that even he didn't realize. Later researchers discovered bevels on the mound. These were aligned to true north, the sunsets on summer and winter solstices. It also shows the spring and fall equinox. The 3 other mounds also align astronomically. Mound B lines up with the rising of the star Fomolo in the fall with mathematical precision. This star is 25 light years from Earth, and although it appears small in the sky, it's twice the size of our sun. How these ancient people calculated these celestial events and why they found them significant is a true mystery. This was built by the Adena people and later occupied by the Hopewell culture. It's nearly 2,200 years old. The interior platform is 60 feet across, and we can only imagine the ceremonies that were conducted. While dramatic looking today, it was even more impressive in antiquity before erosion. To the west of the mound are caverns, found in the bluff above White River. They were rumored to both extend beneath the mounds and hold prehistoric artifacts. However, in the 1920s, a little girl wandered into the caverns and was lost for hours. After she was rescued, the cave openings were filled in to prevent future tragedies. It's uncertain what happened to the artifacts, where the caves went, or what mysteries are still down there. This closely resembles how Central American temples were built on top of caverns called cenotes that were thought to lead to the underworld, the city of the dead. When settlers arrived in the area in the 1800s, Native Americans told them that this was the domain of evil spirits called Pukwudgies. These mean-spirited, malevolent beings were somehow connected to the magic of the mounds. A lot like trolls in appearance, they had magical powers, could disappear at will, and shot poison arrows from their bows. they were not to be trifled with. Amazingly, people in recent times claim to have seen these beings in the woods behind the mounds. Supernatural considerations aside, the resemblance to ancient Central American cultures cannot be overlooked. It would be one of many strange things that E.T. Cox and William Borden would find in the state of Indiana. In 1879, the discoveries of E.T. Cox were published in the Geological Survey of Indiana. He provided a detailed description of the mounds at Anderson, including one mound flattened for a county road. But he also provided something even more fascinating: maps of lost, ancient cities inside Indiana. At Winchester, Indiana, between the White River and Sugar Creek, were walls of an ancient fort, 1,000 feet wide and 1,320 feet long. Inside its boundaries were 31 acres and a prominent mound in the center, 100 feet wide and 9 feet tall. At Hardinsburg, northwest of Lawrenceburg, he described numerous mounds and strange earthworks. Upon a hill 200 feet high, there was a large circle, much like the one at Anderson, and an enclosure, walls made of stone, averaging 4 feet tall. It enclosed an area of 12 acres. But out of all of these findings, the most mysterious was a place now known as Rose Island, located in Charlestown, Indiana. E.T. Cox and William Borden followed up on what pioneers called a castle. It had walls up to 75 feet tall. There were even stories of ancient skeletons found with copper breastplates. At Rose Island, they found man-made artificial walls to the south and north of the peninsula. Typical with most mound builders, the fortification was put at a high place between two bodies of water, 14 Mile Creek and the Ohio River. Known as the Devil's Backbone, you can see a rocky outcrop above. However, nearly all of the fortification stones were used to build houses and businesses, and the rest of the earthworks were leveled to build an amusement park in the early 1920s. But after the Great Flood of 1937, even the amusement park was made into a ghost town. Whatever trace left of an ancient people completely vanished. But by far, it was not the end of the mound builder story. In fact, it would take a very strange turn. Along the banks of the Ohio River at Clarksville were found 50 skeletons. They were buried in stone tombs, sitting upright and facing the rising sun to the east. Each of them were no less than 6.5 feet tall, with some rumored to be clear giants of immense size. But when exposed to air, these skeletons of great antiquity disintegrated into dust. Just across the river in Louisville, Kentucky, was a complex of mounds. On top of one was built the Grayson House. When the foundation was dug, a skeleton of immense size was found. It was rumored to be at least 9 feet tall, but when exposed to air, it too disintegrated. The speculation evolved that some, if not all, of the mound builders were a race of giants, and this was backed up by other skeletons that did not disintegrate. State geologist John Collette was a very interesting figure in early Indiana archaeology, and no doubt furthered the idea that the mound builders were giants. In 1870, he was called to a farm in Lawrence County to investigate the remains of a large mound. Known as the Dodd Mound, it was located high above the White River in the deserted town of Old Palestine. In 1825, pioneers had deserted the town as they thought it was cursed. A large number of people had died after digging up ancient bones on the hilltop. Before that, it was once considered for the capital city of Indiana. Like the other prominent mounds, it had a commanding view of the waterway and easy access to travel. Professor Collette found a mound covered in stone, 20 feet in diameter. Stone axes and pottery were found near the surface. Below that was found a vaulted burial chamber consisting of 3 levels, separated by large flat stones. On the top level were skeletons of women and children. On the next level were men. And on the 3rd level were 2 skeletons. Both were over 6.5 feet tall. The larger skeleton, possibly the leader, possessed copper earrings and a war whistle. These skeletons did not disintegrate, and they and the other artifacts were sent to the State Museum, which, at the time, was housed in the Indiana State Capitol building. In 1875, Professor Collette visited Elkinsville, Indiana, to investigate a prehistoric site now known as Browning Mountain. Pioneers in the early 1800s had described a stone wall about 4 feet high that ran a long distance along the hilltop, as if it was an ancient city. By the time Professor Collette surveyed the site, the rock wall had been dismantled for building homes, but he did find what resembled ruins from an ancient culture. In his report, he described the site as grand cubes, 3 by 4 feet, and pillars 3 by 4 by 20 feet long, ready squared and dressed as from a giant's workshop, are scattered along the crest of the hill. Whether he intended to suggest that giants had built a fortification or was using the term poetically was unclear. Whatever the case, it promoted the idea that the ancient people building mounds and stone structures in Indiana were giants, and the supporting evidence kept coming. Newcastle, Indiana, 1863, Henry County. During construction of a road 8 miles southwest of town, a gigantic mound covering 5 acres was destroyed. 12 feet below the surface, a giant skeleton, nearly 8 feet tall, was found. It had a 6-inch breastplate made of mastodon ivory and 84 ivory beads. The skull was said to have horns 1.5 inches tall, protruding upward just behind the ear area. Cahokia, Indiana, 1872. On the farm of William Flanagan, where the Little Cahokia and Cahokia rivers meet, was a mound between the two. 3 skeletons were found, all facing to the northeast, a female and 2 men. The one skeleton was described as much larger than modern men, but no size was given. Brewersville, Indiana, 1879. On the Robinson Farm, Indiana State geologists excavated a very large mound, 71 feet in diameter and 5 feet tall. It had once been 30 feet tall before stone was removed for building purposes. Beneath the mound was a skeleton 9 feet 8 inches tall, wearing a mica necklace. But unlike the other skeletons, it was not taken by the state geologist. Instead, it was kept at Keller Gristmill in a basket as a curiosity. When people came by the mill, they could view the bones of a giant. It was a very unique novelty for the small town. But in 1937, the mill was destroyed when Sand Creek flooded with a huge amount of water. And the giant ancient bones in a basket vanished into the floodwaters. All that's left are ruins of a mill and local memories of a gigantic skeleton. One that either dissolved in the raging waters a long time ago, or floated somewhere far away, never to be found again, perhaps at the bottom of a river. But that's not the only story about the Brewersville giant skeleton. George Robinson, just a boy in 1879, said that the bones were kept at the family home. And as visitors dropped by, they would take large bones as souvenirs until only a few were left. Muncie, Indiana, 1881. A mound was uncovered, resulting in many artifacts and skeletons found. The largest, considered the leader, had a thigh bone about 3 inches longer than a modern 6-foot man, making the skeleton an estimated 6.5 foot to 7 feet tall. LaGrange, Indiana, 1882, on the farm of Solomon Hedrick. From a mound 30 feet tall and covering 4 acres, a skeleton of about 8 feet tall was recovered, as was various artifacts, including ivory beads and a shield made of bone. Portland, Indiana, 1885. During a gravel excavation, large ancient skeletons were removed. They had unusual sloping skulls. For a time, they were on display at the county surveyor's office. Shelbyville, Indiana, 1885. At a gravel pit on Franklin Boots Farm, a farmhand named George Arnold uncovered a gigantic skeleton in a sitting position facing the east. Upon examination by local authorities, they estimated the skeleton to be at least 9 feet tall, and based upon the wear of the teeth, the man was at least 100 years old or older when he died. Crawfordsville, Indiana, 1892. In a gravel pit high above Sugar Creek, 25 large skeletons were found. The last one recovered was at least 7 foot tall. Anderson, Indiana, 1892. Numerous large skeletons were found at Mounds State Park. The skulls were not only huge, but possessed a 5th cranial bone. The skeletons disintegrated a short time after being exposed to the air. Shelbyville, Indiana, 1893. On the west bank of the Big Blue River, a mound 75 feet tall, known locally as Hogback Hill, produced numerous skeletons and artifacts near the surface. But 12 feet under the summit, a gigantic skeleton, about 8 to 9 feet tall, was found with its head facing east. But in 1925, at Walkerton, Indiana, a truly unusual ancient burial was found. Below a mound was found 8 large skeletons, about 8 to 9 feet tall. Their bodies were arranged like spokes of a wheel. All of them possessed substantial copper armor. The largest of the skeletons still had a flint arrowhead embedded in his skull. This was perhaps the find of the century. With all these amazing giant skeletons found in both Indiana and across the United States that did not disintegrate, the proof should speak for itself. There should be no doubt that giants not only lived in North America, but built gigantic mounds and stone fortifications. But that's not how it ended up. Amazing giant skeletons and artifacts, once in private hands, disappeared. Skeletons sent to the state museums and even the Smithsonian are not registered in their catalogs. Even if they considered them a hoax or had exaggerated sizes to sell newspapers, they should be there. But they are simply gone. This has led many to speculate that the leadership at the Smithsonian and other institutions deliberately wanted to suppress this information. Perhaps our own government is involved in a massive cover-up. But why? Giants have been recorded throughout written history, such as the biblical story of David facing a giant Philistine soldier with only a slingshot. Beyond that, we have actual photographs, eyewitnesses, and documentation of modern giants. Due to a defect in his pituitary gland, Robert Wadlow grew to 8 feet 11.1 inches, making him the tallest man to ever live, at least that we can verify. At Shelbyville, Indiana, the same area known for numerous giant skeletons, lived a woman named Sandy Allen. She also had a defect in her pituitary gland. She grew to 7 foot 7 inches tall. If she hadn't had a medical treatment to make it stop, she would have grown much taller. Lots of NBA players in the past and present have been over 7 feet tall. Yao Ming is 7 foot 6 inches tall. Clearly, we have giants living among us today. So why would museums or our government want to cover up what we already know? According to some, there's a darker, scarier explanation. In the Bible, the 6th chapter of Genesis, 4th verse, it says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown." In other words, angels married human females, and the result were babies that grew into giants known as the Nephilim. Then came the story of Noah's Ark and a gigantic flood that killed everyone on earth except for Noah's family and the animals taken on the boat. This would suggest that all these giants died. Or did they? Many other cultures had stories of the same flood, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, with some professing that giant men escaped on boats. Later in the Bible, Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt through the Red Sea, and they wander through the desert. Eventually, they come upon a city with huge walls. In the book of Numbers, 13th chapter, verse 33, it says, "And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. Again, there's a parallel in Sumerian, Assyrian, and Babylonian stories. The giants are called Anunnaki, which sounds very similar to the sons of Anak mentioned in the Bible. When completely different cultures tell very similar stories, there's often at least a grain of truth to be told. But so what? There were giants in ancient times, and giants live among us today. What's the big deal about that? Some people theorize that the giants of ancient times were actually aliens. That's how they possessed the incredible knowledge to build the giant pyramids, mounds, and other amazing structures of antiquity with such precision, even building details that can only be seen from high up in the sky. As the theory goes, they align these monuments to the stars because that's where they came from. If that's true, governments wouldn't want people alarmed that giant aliens not only existed in the past, but they might be coming back. But maybe, just maybe, we're missing something. At Evansville, Indiana, is the Angel Mounds Plateau. It's one of the most well-preserved and studied mound complexes in the nation. That's largely due to the efforts of archaeologist Glenn Albert Black and his wife, Ida May. They came here in 1939. Over the next 25 years, they methodically surveyed every corner of the grounds, over 450 acres. With the help of 250 workers, they did an enormous amount of excavation, totaling 120,000 square feet by 1942. That's the equivalent of 2 football fields. With the unlimited financial support of Colonel Eli Lilly, founder of Eli Lilly Pharmaceuticals, Glenn and Ida were able to study and compare these artifacts to others found throughout the state without any time limits. Over 2.3 million artifacts were found at the Angel Mound site, providing a much better understanding of these ancient, forgotten people. They were experts in weaving, creating pottery, art, and jewelry. They even created musical instruments. Exiting from the back of the interpretive center, visitors can walk where ancient people walked and feel a sense of immense history. On the grounds, there are 11 mounds in all, ranging from rounded to irregular platforms. Glenn Black also found remnants of a massive wall, one that encircled the entire city. The walls were 12 feet tall and several feet thick. The one here is a reproduction. The question is, why such a tall wall? Were the people that lived here giants? Or Were they worried about someone big on the outside? The fact is, none of the skeletons found here were giants. It could be that men that were taller were made the leaders. There is no hard evidence that giants made up a large population. Where large skeletons were found, they were often accompanied by many smaller ones. It's also possible that amateur archaeologists might have overestimated the size of a skeleton without flesh and blood to put everything together. It's also noteworthy that the early newspapers often exaggerated stories to sell papers. Inflating the size of a skeleton and calling it a giant would definitely get people's attention. In fact, many duplicate reports of the same skeleton excavations were either 7 to 9 foot giants or not even mentioned as being tall at all. Wherever you stand on the issue, the true giant at Angel Mounds was Glenn Black. He devoted 25 years of his life to understanding these ancient people. Glenn died in 1964, suffering a heart attack while still excavating at Angel Mounds. His immense work and dedication dispelled many myths, while leaving numerous open questions. Once you've seen a mound in Indiana or elsewhere, you start to wonder if maybe you've overlooked others. A hill may not be a hill, but instead a very ancient place. Indiana has an area of 36,418 square miles, with most of southern Indiana densely covered with forest. Ancient mounds could be anywhere, mistaken for natural hills. Fields with a small hill in the middle, standing there all alone, makes you wonder if they've tilled around an ancient mound for generations. And this has often been the case. In the state of Indiana, there are over 2,100 mounds. There are likely many more, but have never been recorded. This one at Evansville looks like just another hill. But so did the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico until it was excavated. The El Castillo Temple, also in Mexico, was so overgrown that it was unrecognizable before excavation. In Indiana, there could be many more ancient, exotic discoveries hiding in plain sight, and we just haven't found them yet. For decades, kids at Vincennes, Indiana, rode their sleds down Sugarloaf Mound every winter, not knowing that hundreds of dead people lay just below them. As much as we've studied and continue to research, we may never know everything about the mound builders. But perhaps that's part of the appeal. Lost tombs, giant skeletons, advanced ancient civilizations. It's all very captivating. Wherever there's a space in our understanding, our imagination fills the gaps, and that sense of wonder and question marks makes the journey worthwhile.